Hey everyone, we're diving into an article today that really got you all talking, and to be honest, it's got me thinking too.
Oh, yeah. Which one is that?
It's by Dr. Jaime Hoerricks, and it's all about rethinking this whole idea of rigor in education.
That's a good one. I remember when that article came out.
Yeah, and especially how traditional ideas of rigor, like really tough standards and expectations,
Yeah.
can actually make things harder for autistic learners.
Mm, interesting.
And one of the things that really struck me right away, just from Dr. Hoerricks' bio, was that they bring so much to this conversation.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, they're autistic themselves. They have a PhD. They're a Gestalt Language Processor
Wow.
and a long-term English learner.
Right. Talk about a unique perspective.
Exactly. It's like, who better to talk about how the education system works or doesn't work for students who learn differently?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's this one image that Dr. Horrocks uses that has really stuck with me. They describe language as a tightrope for them.
A tightrope. That's an interesting way to put it.
Right. What do you think they mean by that?
Well, if you think about it, for someone who's a Gestalt language processor, which Dr. Horrocks is,
Yeah.
it means they're learning language in these, chunks and patterns, not word by word like most of us do.
Mm.
So imagine trying to solve a really complex math problem while you're still trying to figure out what each individual word in the instructions means.
Whoa.
It's like constantly walking this tightrope, trying to keep your balance and process everything at the same time.
Wow. Okay. I can see how that would make, traditional classrooms with all the emphasis on speed and just rapid-fire instructions really, really tough.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
like the environment itself is almost working against them.
Exactly. And then you add on top of that the pressure of traditional rigor, the whole idea that you got to cover a ton of material quickly and ace those standardized tests.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Horrocks sees that as more about weeding students' OUT than actually helping them learn.
And this isn't just some theoretical idea for them either, right? They actually share some pretty intense examples from their own education, things that really happened to them.
Right. It makes it so much more real when you hear those personal stories.
Yeah. Like the one about their experience with assessments really got to me.
Oh, yeah. What did they say about that?
They said it felt more like they were being tested on how well they could hide their confusion than on what they actually understood.
Oh, wow.
It's just heartbreaking to think about all the brilliant students out there who are getting lost in a system that doesn't value their unique way of learning.
It really is. And, that feeling of being overwhelmed, like you don't belong, that ties directly into what's called the affective filter.
Okay, hold on. Break that down for me. What exactly is the affective filter, and how does it relate to this whole rigor thing we're talking about?
Okay, so think about a time when you were so stressed out about a test that you couldn't remember anything, even though you studied.
Oh, yeah. I've totally been there.
Right. Well, that's the affective filter in action. It's basically that wall that goes up in your brain when you're feeling stressed or scared or doubtful.
So it's like an emotional barrier to learning.
Exactly. And the thing is, traditional rigor, with all its pressure and high stakes testing, just makes that filter even stronger for a lot of students, especially those who learn differently, like GLPs.
So it's like a double whammy.
Hmm.
They're already dealing with a system that doesn't really match their learning style. And then they're getting hit with all this pressure to perform in a way that makes it even harder to access the material.
You got it. It's no wonder so many students just shut down in these environments. It's not that they're not capable, it's just that the system is fighting against their natural strengths.
And that's where Dr. Horrocks' call to reframe rigor comes in, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They're not saying we should lower our standards or just make things easier. It's more about recognizing that real rigor looks different for different learners.
And that we need a more inclusive approach if we really want all our students to succeed.
Okay, I'm with you so far. But how do we actually DO that? How do we reframe rigor in a way that's more inclusive?
Well, Dr. Horrocks has some pretty interesting ideas about that. Like, for example, they talk about shifting the focus from breadth to depth.
Hmm.
Instead of rushing through a ton of material, slow down and let students really dig deep into fewer topics.
I see. That sounds kind of counterintuitive to how a lot of schools operate.
It does, doesn't it? But it makes a lot of sense, especially for GLPs who need that time to process and make connections.
Yeah, I can see that.
Like Dr. Horrocks talks about how when they slowed down to really focus on one topic in depth, their students actually ended up understanding it much better.
Interesting.
It gave them the time and space to really wrestle with those ideas, to make those connections and feel like they were mastering the material.
To giving them a chance to really build a solid foundation instead of just skimming the surface.
Exactly. But now here's the question. How do you make sure everyone is being challenged at the right level, especially in a classroom with different kinds of learners?
That's a good question.
Dr. Hoerricks talks about using individualized challenges.
Okay, I like that.
Like they'll break down a word problem for a student who's struggling with the language.
Mm.
Or they'll use visual aids like algebra tiles for a student who's having trouble with those abstract concepts.
So it's about meeting each student where they're at and giving them the tools they need to succeed.
Precisely. And it's not about making things easier. It's about providing those scaffolds and pathways so that everyone can reach that higher level thinking.
Like you said earlier, it's about building a system that empowers learners, not one that weeds them out.
I like how you put that. And there's another really important piece to Dr. Hoerricks' vision, and that's making the learning student-centered.
Oh, that's huge.
It is, isn't it? It's about tapping into what students are interested in, connecting what they're learning to their own lives.
That's where those cool examples come in, right?
What examples are you thinking of?
The ones where students created their own polynomial identity problems based on video games and, was it embroidery patterns?
Yes. Those are great examples. You're exactly right.
They're just so creative.
It's not just about memorizing formulas anymore. It's about making the learning relevant.
I could see how that would be so powerful, especially for students who have been turned off by, like, the traditional way math is taught. It shows them that math is more than just these abstract concepts.
It's about understanding the world around us and even, like you said, art and design.
Exactly.
Which actually brings us to another essential part of inclusive rigor, lowering the affective filter.
Wait, didn't we already talk about that?
We did touch on it earlier, but trust me, it's so important to what Dr. Hoerricks is talking about. We really need to dig into it a little more.
Okay, I'm listening.
So imagine a classroom where it's okay to make mistakes, where asking questions is actually encouraged,
Okay.
and where students feel safe to share their thoughts, even if they're not sure if they're right.
That sounds pretty different from what a lot of us experienced in school.
It does, right? And Dr. Hoerricks says that creating this kind of environment actually makes the learning more rigorous, not less.
Really? How so?
Well, think about it. When you take away that fear of failure, what happens?
I guess it frees you up to take risks.
Exactly. You're more likely to try new things, to push yourself further.
I can see that.
And Dr. Hoerricks even tells the story about one of their students who used to avoid anything new or challenging.
Oh, yeah. What happened?
With the right kind of support, and by celebrating even small wins, this student started tackling those tougher problems head on. It's amazing what a supportive environment can do.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And it shows that lowering the affective filter isn't about dumbing things down at all. It's about giving students the space to really grapple with those challenging ideas.
It's about creating the conditions for deep learning to happen.
Exactly. Okay, so to recap, we've got this reframing of rigor to focus on depth over breadth. We've got individualizing challenges to meet students where they are. We've got creating that student-centered environment where learning is connected to their interests.
Yeah.
And we've got lowering that affective filter to create a safe and supportive space for learning.
You got it. And when you put all those pieces together, you start to see that it's not about lowering expectations at all. It's about expanding our understanding of what rigor can be.
And creating a learning environment that truly honors how different students think and learn.
Absolutely. And that's what makes Dr. Hoerricks' vision so compelling. It's not just about, grades and test scores.
It's about empowering students to become confident and curious learners.
Learners who are engaged and excited to keep learning.
Yeah. That sounds pretty transformative. But how does this actually play out in the classroom? Like, what does it look like in action?
Well, that's a great question. And that's exactly what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive into Dr. Hoerricks' work.
Can't wait.
Welcome back. You ready to keep digging into Dr. Hoerricks' work?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm especially curious about the practical side of things.
Yeah, me too.
Like, how do you actually create this inclusive and rigorous learning environment, in the real world, in a real classroom with real kids?
I think that's what we all want to know, right?
Right. So let's get into it.
Okay, so one thing Dr. Hoerricks talks about a lot is creating a classroom culture that empowers students.
Okay. Yeah. That sounds great in theory, but what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, one example is using a lot of peer collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of students always working alone, they're working together to solve problems,
Okay.
sharing their ideas, helping each other out.
I like that. It takes the pressure off a bit, you know?
It does, it does. And it creates this sense of shared responsibility for the learning.
Yeah, it's not just about you against the teacher or you against the test anymore. It's about everyone working together to figure things out.
Exactly. Which can be really powerful for students who might feel isolated or overwhelmed in a more traditional setting.
Yeah. I bet. And what about feedback? How do you give feedback in a way that's both supportive and de-rigorous?
That's a great question. And I think Dr. Hoerricks would say it's about moving away from just focusing on grades and correct answers.
Hmm.
It's more about recognizing effort and progress.
It's like celebrating those small wins along the way.
Yes. And seeing mistakes as opportunities to learn and grow, not as failures.
I love that. It's like you're creating a space where it's safe to take risks and try new things.
Exactly. And that's where this whole idea of the metristic mindset comes in.
Oh, yeah, I remember that from the article.
Mm-hmm.
But to be honest, I wasn't quite sure what they meant by that.
It's an interesting concept for sure.
So break it down for me. What is this metristic mindset all about?
It's kind of like challenging that traditional patriarchal model of education, you know, the one that's all about competition and individual achievement.
Okay.
And instead, the metristic mindset focuses more on collaboration and nurturing.
Mm.
And this idea that learning is more of an interconnected process, not just about individual success.
So it's not just about changing how we teach. It's about changing the whole culture of the classroom.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels valued and respected.
And empowered to contribute their unique perspective.
Exactly.
Which actually ties in really nicely with Dr. Hoerricks' emphasis on curiosity-driven learning.
You got it. It's not just about rote memorization.
Yeah.
It's about letting students ask questions, explore what they're interested in.
And make those connections to the real world.
Right. Remember that awesome example with the student who connected polynomial symmetry to embroidery pattern?
Oh, yeah, that was so cool. I mean, at first I thought it was just a cute little anecdote.
Right.
But now I'm realizing how profound it actually is.
It really shows how personalized learning can lead to that deep, genuine engagement.
Yeah, and it challenges that whole idea that math is just this abstract, boring subject, you know?
Definitely. It shows that math is all around us, even in unexpected places like art and design.
Exactly. And it's about giving students the freedom to explore those connections on their own terms.
Absolutely.
But I know some people might push back on this whole idea of personalized learning.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
Like, they might say it's fun and engaging, sure. But is it really rigorous?
I hear you. I think Dr. Hoerricks would probably say that true rigor isn't about how MUCH content you cover.
Right.
It's more about how deeply students understand that content.
And how well they can think critically and apply what they've learned to new situations.
Exactly. When students are curious and invested in what they're learning, they're going to push themselves further.
And they're going to reach a much higher level of mastery in the end.
That's the idea anyway.
Yeah. So it's about reframing our definition of rigor to include not just content knowledge, but also those essential skills like problem solving and creativity and collaboration.
All those things that are going to help students succeed in life, not just in school.
Exactly. Okay, I'm really starting to get this whole picture of inclusive rigor.
Yeah. What's clicking for you?
Well, it's about focusing on depth over breadth. It's about individualizing challenges. It's about making the learning student-centered. It's about lowering that affective filter.
And it's definitely not about lowering expectations.
Right. It's about expanding our understanding of what rigor can be.
And making sure all students have the opportunity to reach their full potential.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the principles behind inclusive rigor.
We have, haven't we?
Now I'm wondering about the nitty-gritty details.
Yeah, let's get into the specifics.
Like, how does Dr. Hoerricks actually make all of this happen in their classroom?
Well, one thing they talk about is honoring diversity.
Okay, yeah, that's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
But what does that look like in action?
It's about recognizing that all students come from different backgrounds and have different experiences, different strengths, different learning styles.
Right.
And it's about creating a classroom where everyone feels seen and heard and valued for who they are.
That sounds beautiful, but also really challenging.
It is. But Dr. Hoerricks gives some concrete examples of what they do in their classroom.
Like what?
Well, for example, they talk about incorporating culturally relevant examples into their lessons.
Interesting.
Like they might highlight the contributions of, say, Arabic mathematicians or Mesoamerican mathematicians.
Wow. Okay, so you're showing students that math isn't just this Eurocentric thing,
Exactly. And you're helping them see themselves reflected in the curriculum.
which can be so empowering for students who might have felt marginalized or excluded in the past.
Yeah, it's about sending that message that their cultures and their backgrounds are valuable.
I love that.
And Dr. Hoerricks also talks about offering multiple pathways to learning.
Okay, so it's not just about lectures and textbooks anymore.
No way. It's about bringing in visual aids, hands-on activities, even movement,
Okay, yeah, to make the learning more accessible.
and more engaging. And it's also about giving students choices in how they show what they've learned.
So like some students might prefer to write, some might prefer to draw, some might want to build something.
Or even sing or dance. It's all about recognizing that there are many different ways to be intelligent and successful.
I love that.
It's all about creating that space where everyone can shine in their own way.
And Dr. Hoerricks even brings up this fascinating idea of flow states in learning.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
It's about that feeling of being completely absorbed in what you're doing.
Exactly. Where time just kind of melts away and you're totally in the zone.
Yeah, that's a great feeling.
And Dr. Hoerricks talks about how they actually structure their classroom to encourage these flow states.
I'm picturing like beanbag chairs and mood lighting and chill music.
It might not be quite that extreme, but it's definitely about creating an environment that feels calm and focused.
Okay, yeah. So students can really concentrate and get lost in their learning.
Exactly. And it's not just about letting them run wild either.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. How do you keep things on track?
Dr. Hoerricks is really big on finding that balance between predictability and openness.
Meaning?
Like, they have clear routines and expectations so students know what to expect.
Okay.
But there's also room for exploration and creativity.
So it's about creating a space that feels safe and predictable, but also allows for spontaneity and discovery.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, I'm really digging this whole approach. It's just so thoughtful and intentional.
It is, isn't it? And it's clearly having a positive impact on Dr. Hoerricks' students.
Yeah, I'm ready to hear some of those success stories.
Me too. But I think it's time for a quick break.
Oh man, always leaving us hanging.
When we come back, we'll hear about how Dr. Hoerricks' vision of inclusive rigor has actually transformed the lives of their students. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back. We left off talking about how Dr. Hoerricks makes inclusive rigor actually happen in the classroom.
Right, yeah. And they share some really inspiring stories.
Oh yeah, like what?
Well, there's this one about a bilingual autistic student, and she was really struggling in a traditional classroom setting.
Makes sense, given everything we've talked about.
Yeah, exactly.
Like she would just shut down when things felt overwhelming.
Yeah, those strict time limits and abstract instructions, all that just amplified her affective filter.
So how did Dr. Hoerricks help her?
They really focused on creating a safe and supportive environment, where she felt comfortable taking risks. Like they used visual aids, things like the box method,
Yeah.
and they broke down the process of writing those CER explanations, claim, evidence, reasoning into smaller steps.
Oh yeah, I remember those from school.
And get this, they even encouraged her to use both Spanish and English when explaining her reasoning.
Wow, I love that. Honoring her bilingualism as a strength.
Exactly. It's not about making things easier. It's about recognizing that different students have different ways of learning and expressing their understanding.
Yeah, and celebrating those differences. So what happened with this student? Did things get better for her?
The transformation was incredible.
Really? Tell me more.
She went from avoiding those challenging tasks to actually explaining them to her classmates.
Wow.
And she was even switching back and forth between Spanish and English like it was no big deal.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and Dr. Hoerricks said you could just hear the pride in her voice when she was presenting her work.
Oh, wow. That gives me chills.
It really shows the power of creating that space where rigor and individual expression can coexist.
And it's not just about this one student.
Right.
It's about challenging that whole traditional idea of what success looks like.
Yeah, it's not just about getting the right answer or acing a test.
It's about fostering a love of learning.
And helping students develop those essential skills that are going to help them throughout their lives.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about individual teachers and classrooms, but what about the bigger picture?
Yeah, that's what Dr. Hoerricks wants us to think about, too.
Like, what kind of systemic changes need to happen to make education more inclusive and equitable for all learners?
That's the big question, isn't it?
And it's not an easy one to answer.
It's not. But I think we can start by questioning some of those long-held assumptions about what learning should look like.
Yeah, like who gets to decide what counts as rigor?
And whose voices and experiences are being valued.
And maybe most importantly, what would it look like to create a system where all ill students, regardless of their background or their learning style, have the opportunity to thrive?
Those are the questions we need to be asking.
And they're not easy questions.
Not at all. But I think Dr. Hoerricks' work gives us a lot to think about and a lot to hope for.
Yeah, it really does. Well, this has been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with me.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
And to all of you listening out there, we hope this has sparked some new ideas for you.
Yeah, keep those conversations going.
And keep pushing for a world where every learner can truly shine.
We'll see you next time.